My name is Isla Marsh, and I was 31 when I realized that 3 restaurants, 42 employees, and my brother's entire reputation as a rising culinary star were all quietly standing on paperwork with only my name at the bottom of it. Not his name, not our father's. Mine, printed in small type on documents nobody in my family had ever bothered to read past the signature line. I want to tell you what kind of story this is before I tell you the story itself. It is not a story about a kitchen fire or a screaming match over a ruined service, though there is a scene like that, and it comes later. It is not the center of the story. The center of the story is a state license, a personal loan guarantee, and 11 words I had heard so many times I could say them in my sleep before I ever said them out loud to end it. The family business was called Salt House Hospitality, 3 restaurants strung along the coast 2 hours from the city. The kind of places written up in glossy dining guides, the kind of places where the host stand, my brother's headshot on a laminated card, and my name appeared nowhere at all. For 9 years, I had held the state liquor license that let all 3 locations legally pour a glass of wine, and I had personally guaranteed the $480,000 construction loan that built the flagship location from a boarded-up hardware store into the restaurant that made my brother famous. My brother Colton held the title of executive chef and owner, a title on the menu, on the website, on the side of the catering van. I held the license and the debt. They knew this, the way people know about a smoke detector, present, necessary, and completely unconsidered until the exact moment the room fills with smoke. What they did not know was that a $6.4 million sale to a hospitality investment firm was 2 signatures away from closing, and both of those signatures belonged to me. I was invited to the closing dinner too. They asked me to greet guests at the door. Visual: a coastal restaurant exterior at dusk, a laminated menu with a chef's headshot, a liquor license framed on a wall. I was 16 the first time I understood how the ledger of my family actually balanced. My grandmother had left a modest inheritance split evenly between Colton and me, meant for college, sitting in 2 separate accounts my father managed until we turned 18. The year Colton flunked out of a business program and enrolled instead in a culinary school with a steep tuition gap, my father sat me down at the kitchen table and explained gently that he'd need to move a portion of my account to cover the difference. "You're the smart one," he said. "You'll figure out scholarships. Colton needs this more than you do right now." I did figure out scholarships, 3 of them, stitched together with a part-time job at a shoe store, and a summer spent tutoring algebra to 8th graders, because the alternative was saying no to my father's face. And at 16, I did not yet know that was an option available to me. Colton never mentioned the money again, possibly because he never fully understood whose money it had originally been. I understood it perfectly. Every single semester I sat in a financial aid office instead of a dorm room orientation, doing math that had never been mine to do in the first place. Visual: a shoebox of scholarship letters, a financial aid office waiting room, a part-time job schedule pinned to a corkboard. I was 19, home from my first year of college, when I first understood exactly how that same ledger would keep working for the rest of my adult life. Colton, 22, and freshly out of a culinary program, had been arrested for driving under the influence after a friend's wedding, his second offense in 3 years, and the conviction that his background check would fail any state liquor licensing application for a mandatory waiting period, a fact my father explained to me at the kitchen table in the flat. practical tone. It's not permanent, my father said. It's a formality. We just need a clean name on the paperwork while he sorts himself out. I had a 19-year-old's checking account and a 19-year-old's credit history, which is to say almost none of either. But I had never so much as gotten a parking ticket, and that apparently was the only qualification that mattered. My mother squeezed my hand across the table and said the family was so lucky to have someone steady like me. I did not yet understand that steady, in my family's dictionary, was simply another word for available. I signed the first document that spring without reading past the highlighted line my father had marked with a yellow sticky note. I did not think about it again for almost a year, the way you don't think about a single loose thread until the day the whole sweater comes apart in your hands. Visual: a kitchen table with a highlighted document, a yellow sticky note, a pen. The 11 words arrived properly the following spring, when the first restaurant was ready to open, and the paperwork multiplied faster than any of us expected. There was the state liquor license, which had to carry an individual's name as the registered holder, not a company's. There was the construction loan, which the bank would not extend to a 23-year-old line cook with a felony-adjacent record and no collateral, and would extend, at a slightly better rate, to his 20-year-old sister with a part-time internship salary and, more importantly, no criminal history to disclose. The loan officer, a brisk woman named Patricia, who I would come to know very well over the following 9 years, explained the personal guarantee clause to me in about 90 seconds, the way you'd explain a parking rule, sliding a pen across the desk before I'd even finished reading the paragraph, and asked if I understood that I was pledging my own future assets against the loan. Yes. I was 20. I did not have any assets yet to understand the weight of pledging. My father sat across from me at that same kitchen table, a fresh stack of papers between us, and said the sentence that would define the next 9 years of my life without either of us fully understanding it yet. "We just need your name on this one," he said. "It doesn't mean anything. It's just paperwork." I signed the liquor license application. I signed the personal guarantee on a $480,000 construction loan, 20 years old. My signature the only thing standing between my brother's dream and a bank that would never have looked at him twice on his own. It didn't mean anything, my father said. It meant, in practice, that if the restaurant ever failed, I would personally owe a bank nearly $500,000 for a business I did not own a single share of. Visual: a bank loan application, a construction site with exposed framing, a state license application form. I was 24 when I turned down a marketing director position at a regional restaurant group 2 states away. A real salary, a real title, health insurance that didn't depend on my brother remembering to file the paperwork, because Salt House's second location was opening in 8 weeks, and the bank needed my signature on a second construction loan before the contractor would break ground. Colton was 27 then, doing television spots for the local news, teaching a knife skills segment on a morning show, building what my mother called his brand. He was too busy building his brand. I was not too busy. I was steady. That was still the word. I moved into a studio apartment, 11 minutes from the flagship location, and started working the books 3 nights a week after my actual job, because the restaurant group could not yet afford a real controller, and I understood spreadsheets better than anyone in the family who wasn't being paid to. I met a man named Julian that year, an ER nurse who worked overnight shifts and thought it was funny, in a way that eventually stopped being funny to either of us, that we both spent our lives keeping other people's emergencies from becoming catastrophes. We dated for 2 years. He asked me gently, more than once, why the restaurant's insurance renewal came addressed to me and not to Colton, why I kept a folder of loan statements in my nightstand drawer, like other people kept spare batteries. I told him it was just paperwork. He asked why paperwork always seemed to cost me a Saturday. I did not have a good answer, and eventually neither did he, and he moved to take a position at a hospital across the country without asking me to come, because by then he already knew what my answer would be. Visual: a studio apartment, a spreadsheet open on a laptop late at night, a hospital parking garage. I was 26 when I quietly kept the second location from closing during a 6-week stretch that nearly ended everything, though no one outside the walk-in cooler ever knew how close it came. A supplier dispute froze the restaurant's produce account right as a slow season hit. Payroll for 18 employees came due on a Friday, with the operating account $9,000 short, and Colton was in another state, filming a pilot for a cooking competition show that would eventually get canceled after 4 episodes. I moved $22,140 of my own savings into the business account over 6 weeks, transfer by transfer, small enough each time that no one else reconciling the books would think twice, to cover payroll and keep the walk-in stocked. Money I'd been saving for a down payment on a condo, gone in careful increments no one asked me about, because no one else was watching the account closely enough to know. When Colton came back from filming, the restaurant was open, the staff was paid, and the produce order had never once been late. He told a table of investors that week that Salt House had weathered a rough patch through sheer operational discipline, gesturing vaguely at the dining room as if discipline were a fixture on the wall. I was standing by the host stand when he said it, holding a stack of menus, and I did not correct him. I had already learned by 26 that correcting him rarely changed anything except the temperature of the room. Visual: a walk-in cooler at night, a bank transfer confirmation on a phone, a stack of unpaid invoices. I caught the other near disaster the following year, purely by accident, the same way I seemed to catch everything that actually mattered. A new kitchen manager at the second location had been falsifying the walk-in cooler's temperature logs for 3 weeks, marking down safe numbers instead of the actual readings, because the compressor had been running warm, and he didn't want to bother anyone with a repair request during a busy stretch. I found the discrepancy while reconciling the maintenance invoices against the log sheets, a habit no one had asked me to keep, but that I kept anyway, the night before a surprise county health inspection that would have failed the location on the spot, triggered a temporary closure, and very likely costed a spot on a Best New Restaurants shortlist the local paper was finalizing that same week. I drove out at 11 that night, pulled the actual temperature data off the unit myself, called an emergency repair technician I'd used before, and paid the after-hours service fee, $310, out of my own card because the location's petty cash drawer was, as usual, empty. The inspector arrived at 9 the next morning to a properly functioning cooler and clean logs, and noted, almost as an aside, that the location's paperwork was some of the most organized she'd seen all month, a comment that went into a file no one in my family ever read. The restaurant made the short list. Colton accepted the nomination at a small press gathering 2 weeks later and thanked his kitchen team for their relentless attention to detail. I read about it in the same newspaper that almost hadn't had a restaurant left to write about. Visual: a cooler temperature log, a late-night repair technician's van, a newspaper shortlist announcement. The third restaurant opened when I was 28, and by then the pattern was so worn into place that no one, including me, thought to question it anymore. I signed the third liquor license. I personally guaranteed a line of credit for the build-out. Once, at a family dinner celebrating the opening, I asked carefully whether it might make sense for me to actually hold equity in the company at this point, given that my name was the only one the bank and the state had ever actually verified. My mother set down her fork with a small, precise click. "Isla, honey, we just need your name on this one," she said, the same 11 words, worn smooth as beach glass from years of handling. "It doesn't mean anything. Colton's the one who built this place. You know that." I did know that Colton had built something. I also knew that what he had built was standing entirely on a foundation the bank and the state had only ever agreed to pour because of me. I did not say this out loud. I passed the rolls. Visual, a family dinner table, a liquor license certificate, a hand setting down a fork. The exclusion sharpened again the year Colton married Bianca, a hospitality public relations consultant, whose client list included 2 James Beard semifinalists and a boutique hotel chain. My mother mentioned in nearly every conversation for months beforehand. I handled most of the rehearsal dinner logistics, negotiated the venue deposit down by $3,000, using a relationship I'd built with a linen supplier through the restaurants, and quietly co-signed the final venue balance when the wedding account came up short 2 weeks before the date. $2,800 I never saw again, and never asked to see again, because by then asking. At the rehearsal dinner itself, my mother seated me near the kitchen with 2 cousins I barely knew, while Bianca's parents sat with my parents and Colton at the head table, alongside 2 of Bianca's higher-profile clients my mother had specifically asked to invite. "It's just easier this way, sweetheart," my mother said, refilling my water glass instead of meeting my eyes. "You know how to make everyone comfortable." "That's your gift?" I watched from the side table as Bianca's mother asked warmly, who had actually gotten the deposit corrected on such short notice, since the venue coordinator had mentioned it was unusual. My mother laughed and said the venue must have simply made an error in their favor. Bianca, seated close enough to hear, glanced toward the side table for just a moment, and something in her expression told me she already suspected the truth, even if she said nothing that night. I finished my dinner surrounded by cousins arguing about a fantasy football league, and went home before the toasts began. Visual, a rehearsal dinner seating chart, a venue deposit receipt, a side table near a kitchen door. The mechanism revealed itself fully on a Tuesday afternoon in April, when I met with Nora Fitzgerald, a business attorney I'd hired to review the restaurant group's insurance structure after a minor slip-and-fall claim, mostly out of habit, the same careful instinct that had once made me double-check every invoice before it went out the door. Nora pulled the corporate structure up on her screen and went quiet in the particular way professionals go quiet when they found something the client didn't know to ask about. "Isla," she said, "you understand that you are personally and individually liable on all 3 of these loans. Not the LC. Not your brother. You. If this business defaults, the bank comes after your personal assets, not the company's." I told her I knew that, in the vague way you know your own blood type, a fact filed away and never tested. What I hadn't fully understood, what she explained slowly and precisely over the next 40 minutes, was the flip side of that exposure. Because I held the liquor license and the loan guarantees individually, any sale of the business would legally require my signature, my consent, and my formal release from the guarantees before a single dollar could change hands. "Nobody sells this business without you," she said. "Not your father. Not Colton. Nobody signs anything that matters without your name on it first. She tapped the screen once more. You've been treating this like a burden for 9 years. Legally speaking, it's the opposite. It's the only real leverage anyone in that family has ever handed you. And they handed it to you by accident. I sat in her office for a long moment, looking at the corporate chart on her monitor, at my own name appearing in box after box, while my brother's appeared only once, at the very top, in a title with no legal weight attached to it at all. I did not act that weak. I filed the information away, quietly, the way I filed everything. Visual. A law office with a corporate structure chart on a monitor, a liability document, a pen resting on a legal pad. Nora explained the numbers to me plainly a few days later, over coffee, laying it out the way you'd read a recipe aloud to someone who already knew how to cook. Between the 3 loan guarantees and 9 years of my own money, quietly patched into the business during slow seasons, payroll gaps, and one very bad produce season, I had personally put in just under $31,000 that had never been documented as a loan, an investment, or anything but a favor no one had thought to thank me for. You've essentially been an unpaid, unrecognized investor in this company for 9 years, Nora said, sliding the total across the table toward me. Most people would call that a partnership. Your family called it a favor. I realized while pulling old bank statements at her kitchen table, never once been paid a salary that matched the actual hours I put into the books, the licensing renewals, and the insurance audits, work that any of the 3 restaurants would have had to pay a real controller $60,000 a year to do. I did not act that weak either. I kept working the books, kept renewing the licenses, kept being steady, because I was still deciding whether I wanted to be the kind of person who used a door like this one, quietly, without asking anyone's permission. I decided I could live with the decision whenever I finally made it. I decided to wait for a reason. The family gave me one within the month. Visual. A coffee shop table, bank statements fanned across it, a calculator beside an untouched pastry. The reason arrived in a glossy regional dining magazine spring issue, an 8-page feature titled The Man Behind Salt House, photographing Colton in the flagship kitchen, holding a knife over a cutting board, wearing a chef's coat with his name embroidered on the chest, standing in front of the walk-in cooler, where I'd once moved $22,000 of my own savings to keep the lights on. The article quoted him at length about the discipline it took to build a hospitality group from nothing, about sleepless nights and personal sacrifice. Language that, when I read it standing at the host stand with the magazine still warm from the printer, felt uncomfortably close to describing my life rather. There was a full paragraph about the harrowing early days of the second location, the very 6 weeks I had quietly propped up with my own condo savings, retold now as a story about Colton's grit, about how he'd willed the place through on instinct alone. I was mentioned once in a single sentence near the end as the operation side of the business handled in-house. My mother framed the spread and hung it above the reservation. My father mailed copies to relatives on both sides of the family, the way he'd mailed a county fair ribbon decades earlier for a fair project I no longer remembered clearly enough to feel much about anymore. By then, my meeting with Nora was 3 weeks behind me. I understood exactly what my name was worth. I still hadn't decided whether I would use that knowledge or simply carry it the way I'd carried everything else. Visual. A magazine spread framed on a restaurant wall, a chef's coat with an embroidered name, a reservation book at a host stand. The second incident followed within weeks, at the restaurant group's 9th anniversary dinner, held in the flagship's private dining room for staff, longtime regulars, and a handful of investors my father had been courting for months. Without telling me, the sale conversations had already begun. I arrived in the one good dress I owned, expecting, foolishly, that 9 years of signatures might have earned me a seat at the table for once. My mother met me near the entrance, with a small stack of menus already in her hands. "We're a little short at the door tonight," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The investors are seated with us. It just makes more sense for you to greet people as they come in. You're so good at making people feel welcome." I was good at making people feel welcome. I had spent 9 years learning exactly how to stand at the edge of a room and make it run smoothly for everyone standing closer to the center than I was. I spent the anniversary dinner at the host's stand, checking names off a list, while through the private dining room's glass partition, I watched my father raise a toast, watched Colton stand to accept it, watched a well-dressed man I didn't recognize lean toward my mother and ask pleasantly who actually ran the licensing and financial side of a group this size. I heard my mother's answer through the cracked door, bright and practiced. "Oh, that's all handled internally," she said. "Nothing you'd need to worry about." I checked off the next name on the list and did not look up again. Visual: a private dining room glass partition, a host stand with a reservation list, a raised toast seen from outside a door. I drafted a resignation letter that night, sitting on my apartment floor with my laptop balanced on my knees. 3 paragraphs explaining, calmly, that I would be stepping back from all financial and licensing responsibilities, effective in 90 days, giving the family time to find another path forward. I read it over 4 times. I did not send it, though I came close enough that my cursor sat blinking over the send button for a full minute before I closed the laptop instead. Some part of me still believed, even then, that if I just held on a little longer, worked a little harder, kept every license current and every payment on time, someone in that family would eventually notice the weight I was carrying and offer to help carry it. I think, if I'm honest, some part of me was still 19, still sitting at that kitchen table, still believing that being steady was a kind of currency that would eventually get spent on my behalf instead of everyone else. I saved the draft in a folder labeled "Someday" and closed the laptop. I did not open that folder again for 5 weeks. Visual: a laptop screen with an unsent draft email, a folder labeled "Someday," an apartment floor at night. The third incident happened 5 weeks later, in a conference room at the flagship location, during the first formal meeting with Anchor Peak Hospitality Partners, the private equity group my father had been quietly courting since the anniversary dinner. My mother asked me to sit in, just in case there were numbers questions, the way you'd ask someone to bring extra chairs from the back room. I brought a folder with every license renewal, every loan statement, every insurance audit I had personally filed for 9 years. Anchor Peak's general counsel, a composed, unhurried woman named Renata Oze, asked an early, routine question about the liquor licenses attached to each location and who currently held them. Colton glanced at our father. Our father glanced at me. I answered, giving the license numbers, the renewal dates, the jurisdiction, because I had filed every one of them myself. Renata Oze looked at me with real interest and asked whether I was general counsel for the restaurant group. Colton laughed, the short, easy laugh he used when he wanted to pull a room's attention back toward himself. "She just handles some of the back office stuff," he said. "I'm the one who actually built this place start to finish. Our father added almost helpfully. Isla's always been good with details. Numbers, paperwork, that sort of thing. As though details were a hobby I kept in a drawer, and not the entire legal skeleton the meeting was being held to evaluate. Renata Oze did not laugh. She made a small note on her legal pad and moved the meeting forward, as though the question had simply been checked off a list. But she looked at me 1 second longer than she needed to before she did. I looked down at the folder in my lap at 9 years of my own initials in the margins of every page. I thought about how easy it would be, how quiet, how permanent. Visual, a restaurant conference room, a legal pad with handwritten notes, a folder of license renewals. I did not act that day either. I drove home with the radio off, thinking not about anger, but about arithmetic. 9 years of signatures, $31,000 of my own money, quietly propping up a business I did not own a share of. 1 sentence in a glossy magazine, 1 sentence through a cracked door. 1 sentence in a conference room delivered with a laugh, the same 11 words waiting somewhere behind it, ready to be said again the next time someone needed my name and nothing else. I called Nora that night. I asked her, plainly, what would happen, legally, if I simply declined to sign my release or transfer the licenses when the Anchor Peak deal reached closing, and whether family accounted for anything in that calculation. Not even a little, she said. The bank doesn't have a line item for, but he's my brother, and neither does the state licensing board. What about the resignation letter, I asked her, almost embarrassed to say it out loud. What about just walking away quietly instead? Nora was quiet for a moment. You could, she said. But quietly walking away means they get to sell a business built on your signature and never once have to explain that to anyone. If that's fine with you, walk away. If it isn't, there's a version of this where you don't have to raise your voice at all. You just have to stop lending them your name. I did not cry on that call. I took notes, careful ones, the same handwriting I used for license renewals and loan statements, because grief and strategy, I was learning, could sit on the same page without touching. I asked her to prepare a formal notice of non-renewal for all 3 liquor licenses and a demand for release from the loan guarantees, effective on a date I would choose. She sent the documents 3 days later. I printed them. I did not schedule anything yet. I was waiting for the right room. Visual, a parked car with the radio off, a printed legal notice on a kitchen counter, a closed laptop. The right room turned out to be the closing dinner itself, held in the flagship's private dining room on the last Friday of September, 2 days before Anchor Peak's legal team was scheduled to wire $6.4 million into an escrow account. 2 days before that dinner, quietly, without announcing anything to anyone, I began the withdrawal. I contacted the State Alcohol Beverage Control Board and filed a formal notice that I would not be renewing or transferring any of the 3 liquor licenses currently held in my name, effective immediately upon any change of ownership. I sent Nora's demand for release from all 3 loan guarantees to the bank, and as a courtesy no one had ever extended me, to my father's email as well. I did not cancel a single utility, did not lock a single door, did not touch the restaurant's day-to-day accounts. I did not even tell Nora to hold off, though she offered twice to give the family a courtesy warning before the filings went through. I told her no. 9 years of courtesy warnings had gotten me a chair by the busser station. I had simply stopped holding my name out over a table that had never once set a place for me. By Thursday afternoon, the bank had called my father twice about the guarantee release, unable to explain the sales financing without it. By Thursday evening, the state board's confirmation email landed in the restaurant group's shared inbox, the one only I actually checked. My mother called 4 times. I let it ring. I was not hiding. I was simply, for the first time in 9 years, not answering on the first ring. Visual: a state licensing confirmation email, a phone buzzing unanswered on a counter, a bank's missed call notification. Colton texted me Friday morning, 3 hours before the dinner, casual at first, asking if I'd heard anything from the bank about some paperwork glitch with the loan. I did not answer. He texted again 20 minutes later, less casual. Mom says you filed something with the state. What'd you file? I set my phone face down on the counter and finished ironing the dress I planned to wear that night. The same steady, unhurried motion I'd used to fold napkins and load dishwashers and balance ledgers for 9 years. Except this time the calm wasn't for anyone else's benefit. Wasn't a performance for a dining room or a bank or a magazine reporter. It was mine. Visual: a phone face down on a counter, an ironing board, a dress hung on a closet door. The dinner began the way every family event began, with my mother's laugh rising, warm, and rehearsed over the murmur of the private dining room, and Grant Delacroix, Anchor Peak's soft-spoken managing partner, seated at the head table beside my father, admiring the room's original brick as though he already owned it. I was seated near the kitchen door, one chair down from the busser station, a placement my mother had arranged, she said, so you could keep an eye on service. After the entrees, my father stood, tapped his glass, and spoke about vision, about family, about a boy who had turned a boarded-up hardware store into something the whole coast talked about. Colton stood next, thanked Anchor Peak for believing in everything he'd built with his own 2 hands. My mother rose beside Grant Delacroix's chair and rested a hand lightly on his shoulder, the same gesture she'd used my entire life to close a conversation gently. Isla's always been such a help behind the scenes, she said, her voice carrying easily over the table. But we just needed her name on the paperwork all these years. It never meant anything more than that. The exact phrase. The same 11 words from the kitchen table at 19, the same 11 words from the dinner table at 28, delivered now with a wine glass in hand, and a room full of witnesses who had no idea what those words had actually cost. I felt them land the way a familiar bruise responds to familiar pressure. I set down my napkin. I stood, unhurried, and walked toward the head table, Nora's folder held flat against my side, like something ordinary, like a wine list, like nothing at all. Visual: a private dining room with original exposed brick, a raised wine glass, a hostess resting a hand on a guest's shoulder. Renata Oze noticed me first, the way lawyers notice a door opening in a room they are trying to control. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, my voice level, the same tone I used calling a supplier about a late produce order. But there's something in tonight's closing summary that isn't accurate, and I think it matters before Monday. The table went quiet, in stages. My mother first, then my father, then Colton, his glass, still lit. Ayla, this really isn't the time, my mother said, a warning wrapped in a smile for Grant Delacroix's benefit. I opened the folder. I slid the first document across the tablecloth to Renata Oze. These are the 3 state liquor licenses attached to Salt House Hospitality, I said. All 3 are individually held by me, not the LLC. As of Wednesday, I filed formal notice with the state board. that none of them will transfer or renew upon any change of ownership. I slid the second document. This is the demand for release I sent the bank on all 3 loan guarantees I personally hold. Until I sign a release, the guarantees stay with me, which means the bank's financing for this sale doesn't clear. Colton's laugh came out thin and fast. Isla, what is this? Are you seriously doing this right now tonight? I slid the third document, a printed ledger. This is $31,000 in personal funds I've put into this business over 9 years. None of it reimbursed, none of it documented as a loan, plus 9 years of controller-level work I was never paid a controller's salary for. Grant Delacroix set down his glass slowly, the warmth draining out of his expression. Robert, he said to my father, your team represented these licenses and guarantees as fully transferable assets of the LLC. My mother's hand found the back of her chair. Isla's always been our foundation, she said, her voice thinner now, reaching for the old script like a rope over water. Why would tonight be any different? I looked at her for a long moment. You said it yourself tonight, I said. You just needed my name on the paperwork. It never meant anything more than that. I let the silence hold, long enough for the small ensemble in the corner to finish a phrase, before I finished it myself. You're right. It never meant anything to you. It's about to mean everything. Mon. Visual. A folder of documents on a white tablecloth. A liquor license under dining room light. A lawyer reading a ledger. Renata Ozay read the licenses with the same unhurried focus she'd shown all evening, her finger tracing the holder field, on each one, then the notice filed with the state board. Then, once more, the holder field. She turned to Grant Delacroix. These filings are dated Wednesday, which means the representations your acquisition team signed off on this morning were already false at the time they were made, she said. That's a material misrepresentation under the warranty clause. We can walk from this deal tonight, and given the loan guarantees, I'd strongly recommend we do. Grant Delacroix stood, buttoning his jacket with the slow, final motion of a man, closing a door he'd expected to walk through easily. He did not look at Colton. He looked at me, then at Renata Ozay, then set his napkin on the table with a small, deliberate fold. I think we're finished here tonight, he said. Colton stood so fast, his chair struck the wall behind him. Beside him, Bianca sat very still, her napkin folded neatly in her lap, and for just a moment, before her expression settled into something practiced and diplomatic, her eyes found mine across the table, the same look she'd given me once over a rehearsal dinner, deposit no one had ever properly thanked me for. She did not defend him. She reached for her water glass instead and said nothing at all, and somehow her silence felt louder than anything my mother had said all night. She's my sister, Colton said, too loud now, the ensemble faltering mid-phrase. This is a family matter, not a legal one. She's upset, that's all. She's always been sensitive about her role here. Colton, Renata Ozay said, not unkindly, closing her folio. Your sister is the only person in this room the state of this deal actually depends on. That isn't sensitivity. That's a licensing board. Grant Delacroix, still standing, added quietly. For what it's worth, Ms. Marsh, my team should have asked to speak with you directly 9 months ago, the moment we saw your name on the corporate filings. That's on us as much as anyone. My father finally spoke, his face gray under the dining room lights. Ella, sweetheart, we can fix this quietly, can't we, after everyone's gone home? I looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had once told me it was just paperwork, that it didn't mean anything. "We could have fixed it," I said. 9 years ago. Any one of the times I asked, I closed the folder. I did not raise my voice once. I turned and walked past the exposed brick, past the host stand where I spent 9 anniversaries checking other people's names off a list, and no one followed me. Not that night. Visual. A folded napkin on a tablecloth. A closed door. A dining room emptying under warm light. The fallout arrived in pieces over the following weeks. The way water finds every low point in a floor it was never meant to sit on. Anchor Peak's attorneys sent formal notice the following Monday terminating the acquisition, citing material misrepresentation regarding licensing and encumbrances, copied to my father, my mother, and Colton. The bank, alerted to the guarantee dispute, froze the flagship location's operating line pending a full review. And for the first time in 9 years, payroll came due with no one quietly moving personal savings to cover the gap. My father left me 2 voicemails, quiet ones, his voice smaller than I remembered it. Colton left 11, the first several furious, the last few mostly silence and breathing. My mother sent 3 messages beginning with variations of "How could you do this to your own brother?" and ending, every time, with some version of "We need to talk, as a family, like adults." I read them standing at my own kitchen counter and did not answer past the first line. Word moved quickly through the small, tightly connected coastal restaurant scene, the way it does when a $6 million deal collapses in front of a private dining room, full of investors holding phones, several of whom, Dennis later told me, had messaged each other before their cars even left the lot. 2 of the 3 locations lost their liquor licenses within 30 days. Once my non-renewal notice took effect, unable to hire a new licensed holder fast enough to avoid a lapse. And both had to suspend wine and cocktail service entirely during their busiest season of the year. A detail the local food press covered with the same enthusiasm it had once reserved for Colton's magazine spread. Dennis Whitlock, the family's longtime attorney, called me that Thursday, not angry, only confused in the particular way of a man realizing a house he'd been standing in for years had no foundation under it at all. He'd drafted half the original loan documents himself, 9 years earlier, and I could hear him flipping through old files while he talked, the rustle of paper he'd apparently never once reread since the day I signed them. "Isla," he said, "the LLC can't legally keep pouring alcohol at 2 of the 3 locations. I need to know if you intend to ever hold a license for this family again." "Ask Colton," I said. "He's the owner." There was a long pause, a pen clicking somewhere on the other end. "Colton's background check still won't clear," he said finally. "It never did." "I know," I said. "He never needed it to. That was always the point." Visual. A law office desk with a phone on speaker, a frozen bank account notice, a liquor license suspension notice taped to a restaurant window. By December, 1 of the 3 locations had closed permanently, unable to survive a season without full beverage service, and Colton had quietly stepped back from public appearances after a local news segment about the deal's collapse used the phrase "family dispute" over hidden liabilities, language a former investor apparently leaked without much hesitation. Bianca sent me a single text that same week, no explanation attached, just a photo of the 2 of us at a long-ago holiday dinner, cropped so it was only our 2 faces, and beneath it 4 words, "I always knew, Eyeless." I did not respond, but I saved the photo. My mother texted once that winter, no apology in it, Only a single line. "Your father hasn't been sleeping. I hope this was worth it." I did not reply. I had learned, slowly, that silence was not cruelty, only the absence of a performance I no longer owed anyone. My father texted in February. 3 short sentences typed the way a man types who still treats a phone like a telegram. "I never once asked what it cost you to keep signing. I should have. I'm sorry, Isla." I read it sitting on my own small balcony, coffee going cold in my hands, the ocean 2 blocks away making its same patient sound, regardless of what any of us had done to each other that year. I read it 3 times. It was not a full accounting, not nearly, but it was the first honest sentence he had sent me in 19 years. I did not answer that day. I answered the next morning. 4 words. "Thank you for saying that." He did not write again. I did not expect him to. Some doors, once opened even a little, only show you exactly how far apart 2 people have grown, and no further than that. Visual. A closed restaurant with a for lease sign, a balcony coffee cup, a single unanswered text thread. I live in a small rental house now, a 15-minute walk from the water with a home office that used to be a sun porch. Nora helped me register my own ELC that spring, a small consulting practice that helps independent restaurants untangle exactly the kind of licensing and guarantee structures that once nearly cost me everything. And my first client, fittingly, was a young chef opening her first place who wanted to know, very specifically, whose name was going to end up on what. I wrote the license and guarantee terms into her operating agreement myself, in plain language, before she signed anything at all, and she cried a little in my sun porch office, not from sadness, she said, but because no one had ever explained any of it to her so plainly before. By autumn, I had 4 clients and a wait list, small restaurant groups and single location owners who had heard through the same tightly connected coastal scene that once carried gossip about my family, that there was a consultant who actually explained the paperwork instead of just asking you to sign it. I have a cat now, an unbothered gray tabby named Ledger, which made Nora laugh so hard she nearly spilled her coffee when I told her the name. I bought myself a proper knife set with my first consulting check, not because I cook professionally, but because I wanted to own something sharp and useful that existed purely because I chose it, with no one else's name attached, no shared account, no line item anyone else could quietly borrow against later. I wake up without an alarm most mornings. I read on my sun porch without checking a phone for licensing renewals or bank calls that were never really mine to carry alone in the first place. And some mornings I still catch myself waiting for the old dread to arrive out of habit. And then I notice it hasn't, and I go back to my coffee. I still love the smell of a busy kitchen in the early evening. I have simply stopped signing my name to things just because someone told me it didn't mean anything. And I have learned, slowly, that a name only ever means as much as the person holding it decides to let it mean. My name is Isla. I am 31. Men I feel to come and to you.